You're in a class, it's near the beginning of the semester, you write an exam or you hand in an essay and you don't get the mark that you desired. Okay, so what are your options? Well, one option would be, so you've hit an anomaly. Things didn't happen the way you wanted them to happen. And so maybe you say, geez, that was a boring and stupid class anyways. This gives me an excuse to get out, and so that's not such a negative thing. Or you think, oh, well, I really better buckle down and study, and you decide to stay in the class. So basically what you've done is maintained your framework. I'm going to work through this class, but you've decided to modify some of the subroutines that make up that frame. You say, well, I should study more next time, or I have to prioritize this class compared to other classes. So it's a micro alteration within the overarching framework. But another thing you can do is say, to hell with the class, I'll just drop it. And so the advantage to that is problem gone. The disadvantage is, well, now you have a different problem, which is, okay, fine, you drop the class. Do you have another class that you can replace it with? Is that a good way of dealing with a micro failure, you know, to move up a level of analysis and throw out the whole frame? Because you could also say, well, maybe I should just drop out of university and maybe I should go hang myself, you know. Well, it's the same line of logic. It's just taken up to a higher degree of abstraction. And so, generally speaking, you don't want to solve a problem by moving up a level and wiping out the frame within which the problem was experienced. You want to do that carefully, because in principle, the frame that you were working within you'd already assigned value to it and worked at it. You've already invested in it. It's a big sacrifice to blow out the whole frame. There's a professor, obviously, who gave you the bad grade. Okay, so one logical presupposition is that you're in some sense insufficient in relationship to the course. But another logical and instantaneous categorization is to throw that person into the category of malevolent predator. And you'll do that by becoming upset and cursing the person in your imagination. You get the bad grade and you're upset about it. And so you've been plunged from your happy, satiated state, let's say, into a state of relative chaos. And the chaos is, oh, I hit an obstacle, I didn't expect it, and now I don't know what to do. And so what does it mean to not know what to do? Well, it can mean I need to study harder. It can mean I should drop this course. It can mean I should major in a different subject. It could mean maybe I shouldn't be in university. It could mean maybe my future plans have been formulated badly. It can mean my future plans have been formulated badly because I don't understand myself very well and I've been telling lies about my past, right? The thing can really expand on you. And that's what the chaotic domain is. That's the re-manifestation of those things that you had considered irrelevant. Right? Because when you go to pick up the exam, you've got your identity as a competent student intact. You're not questioning whether you should be in the course or whether you should be in that major or whether you should be in university. None of that. That's all in the implicitly accepted category. And as soon as the anomalous event emerges, all of those things that you had rendered axiomatic start to become questionable. You know, if you're sitting down to study, for example, your conscious intent is to study, but you know perfectly well that all sorts of distraction fantasies are going to enter the theater of your imagination non-stop and annoyingly, and there isn't really a lot you can do about that except maybe wait it out. You know, so you'll be sitting there reading and your attention will flicker away. You'll think about, I don't know, maybe you want to watch Jane the Virgin on Netflix or something like that, or maybe it's time to have a peanut butter sandwich, or you should get the dust bunnies out from underneath the bed, or it's time to go outside and have a cigarette, or maybe it's time for a cup of coffee, or it's like all these subsystems in you that would like something aren't very happy just to sit there while you read this thing that you're actually bored by, and so they pop up and try to take control of your perceptions and your actions non-stop. Maybe you think, well, this is a stupid course anyways. Why do I have to read this damn paper? And what am I doing in university? And what's the point of life? It's like you can really get going if you're trying to avoid doing your homework. And And then you might think, well, what is it in you that's trying to avoid? Because after all, you took the damn course and you told yourself to sit down. Why don't you listen? Well, because you're a mess. That's basically why. You haven't got control over yourself at all. Maybe you've become very attracted to someone, even maybe you don't want to be attracted to the person, and then you find yourself, texting them when you know perfectly well that you should be going to bed, and you're in a grip of something, and you can't control it, and that's all part of the unconscious and all part of what Freud was studying. If you can teach people to stand up in the face of the things they're afraid of, they get stronger. And you don't know what the upper limits to that are, because you might ask yourself, like, if for 10 years, if you didn't avoid doing what you knew you needed to do, by your own definitions, right, within the value structure that you've created, to the degree that you've done that, what would you be like? Well, there are remarkable people who come into the world from time to time, and there are people who do find out over decades-long periods what they could be like if they were who they were, if they spoke their being forward. And they get stronger and stronger and stronger, and we don't know the limits to that. We do not know the limits to that. And so you could say, well, in part, perhaps the reason that you're suffering unbearably can be left at your feet, because you're not everything you could be, and you know it. And of course, that's a terrible thing to admit, and it's a terrible thing to consider, but there's real promise in it, right? Because it means that perhaps there's another way that you could look at the world, and another way that you could act in the world. So what it would reflect back to you would be much better than what it reflects back to you now. Imagine that many people did that, because we've done a lot as human beings. We've done a lot of remarkable things. My experience is with people that we're probably running at about 51% of our capacity. You can think about this yourselves. I often ask undergraduates how many hours a day you waste, or how many hours a week you waste, and the classic answer is something like 4 to 6 hours a day. Inefficient studying, watching things on YouTube that not only do you not want to watch, that you don't even care about, that make you feel horrible about watching after you're done. That's probably 4 hours right there. You think, well, that's 25 hours a week, it's 100 hours a month, that's 2.5 full work weeks, it's half a year of work weeks per year. And if your time is worth $20 an hour, which is a radical underestimate, it's probably more like 50 if you think about it in terms of deferred wages. If you're wasting 20 hours a week, you're wasting $50,000 a year. And you are doing that right now. And it's because you're young, wasting $50,000 a year is a way bigger catastrophe than it would be for me to waste it, because I'm not going to last nearly as long. And so if your life isn't everything it could be, you could ask yourself, well, what would happen if you just stopped wasting the opportunities that are in front of you? You'd be who knows how much more efficient. 10 times more efficient. 20 times more efficient. That's the Pareto distribution. You have no idea how efficient people get. It's off the charts. Well, and if we all got our act together collectively and stopped making things worse, because that's another thing people do all the time. Not only do they not do what they should to make things better, they actively attempt to make things worse because they're spiteful or resentful or arrogant or deceitful or homicidal or genocidal, or all of those things all bundled together in an absolutely pathological package. If people stopped really, really trying just to make things worse, we have no idea how much better they would get just because of that. So there's this weird dynamic that's part of the existential system of ideas between human vulnerability, social judgment, both of which are major causes of suffering, and the failure of individuals to adopt the responsibility that they know they should adopt. It isn't merely that your fate depends on whether or not you get your act together and to what degree you decide that you're going to live out your own genuine being. It isn't only your fate, it's the fate of everyone that you're networked with. And so, you think, well, there's 9 billion, 7 billion people in the world. We're going to peak at about 9 billion, by the way, and then it'll decline rapidly, but 7 billion people in the world, and who are you? You're just one little dust mote among that 7 billion, and so it really doesn't matter what you do or don't do, but that's simply not the case. It's the wrong model, because you're at the center of a network. You're a node in a network. Of course, that's even more true now that we have social media. You'll know 1,000 people, at least, over the course of your life. And they'll know 1,000 people each, and that puts you one person away from 1,000,000, and two persons away from 1,000,000,000. And so that's how you're connected, and the things you do, they're like dropping a stone in a pond. The ripples move outward, and they affect things in ways that you can't fully comprehend, and it means that the things that you do and that you don't do are far more important than you think. And so if you act that way, of course, the terror of realizing that is that it actually starts to matter what you do. And you might say, well, that's better than living a meaningless existence. It's better for it to matter. But I mean, if you really asked yourself, would you be so sure if you had the choice? I can live with no responsibility whatsoever. The price I pay is that nothing matters. Or I can reverse it and everything matters. But I have to take the responsibility that's associated with that. It's not so obvious to me that people would take the meaningful path. When you say, well, nihilists suffer dreadfully because there's no meaning in their life and they still suffer. Yeah, but the advantage is they have no responsibility. So that's the payoff, and I actually think that's the motivation. Say, well, I can't help being nihilistic. All my belief systems have collapsed. It's like, yeah, maybe. Maybe you've just allowed them to collapse because it's a hell of a lot easier than acting them out. And the price you pay is some meaningless suffering, but you can always whine about that and people will feel sorry for you, and you have the option of taking the pathway of the martyr, so that's a pretty good deal, all things considered, especially when the alternative is to bear your burden properly and to live forthrightly in the world. Well, what Solzhenitsyn figured out, and so many people in the 20th century, it's not just him, even though he's the best example, is that if you live a pathological life, you pathologize your society. And if enough people do that, then it's hell. Really, really. And you can read the Gulag Archipelago if you have the fortitude to do that, and you'll see exactly what hell is like. And then you can decide if that's a place you'd like to visit, or even more importantly, if it's a place you'd like to visit and take all your family and friends, because that's what happened in the 20th century.